Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we have got a really interesting topic today because we're going to be talking about travel as a therapeutic approach to managing grief. Because I have noticed that a lot of people, particularly widows and widowers, are traveling a lot after they've had a loss. Some of them constantly. Now, I have traveled a bit also. I've been to Africa and India and done some things since my husband passed away 5 years ago. So we want to talk to you a little bit about the journey and the traveling and what it means and what you might think about whether you want to travel or not, or looking into your own travel if you've had a loss. And we've got a great guest today who has traveled in many countries, and you're going to enjoy hearing his story. And I know you're going to benefit from hearing how he got through and found hope again. So Heidi, would you like to introduce our guest?
Sure, I'd love to. So our guest today is Barry Hoffner. In 2017, Barry faced unimaginable loss when his wife Jackie tragically passed away in an accident in Botswana. After a deep period of soul searching, he turned once again to travel, not just for exploration, but for healing. Barry is the author of the book, Belonging to the World, A Journey from Grief to Connection in Every Country on Earth. He is also the founder and executive director of Caravan to Class, a foundation that brings access to education in West Africa. Welcome to our podcast, Barry.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here and I appreciate this opportunity.
You have visited 193 countries, is that right?
Actually, 192 up until now, but perhaps by the airing of this podcast, it will be my last country, North Korea, that I'm scheduled to visit in February 2026.
Wow.
Now, Barry, did you visit all those countries after Jackie passed away, or did you visit some of them before with her?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but as I got through my journey of grief to the doorstep of healing, I turned to travel again as a means of trying to find life again. At that point, I had met somebody who had been to every country in the world. And I realized that I had traveled a lot. I'd lived overseas for 16 years. I'd been to many, many countries. Travel was probably the biggest part of my life. And when I met that person, I hadn't yet counted how many countries I'd been to. I'd been to over 120. And that's what
Wow.
the idea of traveling with purpose of visiting every country, that idea was born then.
Interesting. Well, tell us a little bit, let's backtrack about Jackie. She died in 2017.
Right, she did, yes. As I mentioned, I had lived and traveled all over the world. I was living in Singapore, and a woman who I had kept in touch with through university, who I always admittedly had a bit of a crush on, but timing just never seemed to work, Jackie, was passing through Singapore on the way to work in a biology lab in India. This was in 1994. At the same time as I decided to take a sabbatical from my work, I was with JP Morgan in investment banking and going to China to study Mandarin. Jackie and I were just friends then, but I had convinced her to come with me on that journey. And that's when our love story began in the Taj Mahal in India, passing
Wow.
before we went to China. And that 6 month sabbatical turned out to be almost 2 years of travel. We traveled pretty much close to the length of Africa in 1996, came home, and then started a family. So our relationship was born of travel. We spent the first 6 months of our relationship 24/7, living in out of backpacks and really traveling around the world. Then we raised our family here in where I'm at in Sausalito, at the doorstep of our boys, of us becoming empty nesters. My older son had started at Georgetown University, the School of Foreign Service. That was in 2017, and my younger son was on a gap year at Spain studying Spanish intensively. We had decided to sort of reunite our former travels, and Jackie was going off to Africa She was a biologist, but did humanitarian work with large animals, principally elephants and rhinos, and was going off to Africa to visit some of the people that she had connected with. And I was to meet her a few weeks later to do a final week in Kenya at the David Sheldrick Animal Wildlife Trust. I arrived in Dubai, UAE for a connecting flight the next day to meet her in Kenya, only to get a phone call from Botswana that she had been sadly and tragically killed by an elephant on November 14th, 2017.
Wow. That's pretty shocking. I mean, and did you then go to Botswana or did you?
So that was the big dilemma. While in a state of complete shock, I had to pull my head together to figure out what I was going to do. And I decided that it was more important to deal with my children. I mean, I had confirmed, talked to the ambassador in Botswana, talked to all the people involved that Jackie was gone. There was no coming back from that. And I needed to make sure that my kids were informed in the sort of most loving possible way. And so that was my next step. I had a rabbi that we had met in Georgetown go to my older son's room while I called him. And then I got on a plane the next day to go to Spain to inform my son in person, my younger son, Daniel. And then we both flew to DC to be with Benjamin. And that set off a whole chain of what I call year zero, which is a phrase coined by Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper. They both lost their dads at the age of 10, and Steve Colbert calls it year zero, the end of one life, the beginning of another. And that was the start of my year zero.
That makes sense. I like that term. I definitely felt like that when my 17-year-old brother died. Now, I would think that it's very unusual for someone to die from being killed by an elephant, right? And she was working with the elephants, I'm guessing.
So on that trip, it was a horse safari. She had done 2 weeks of work in South Africa, and the Botswana portion, she had a horse. It was a horse safari that she was doing in Botswana.
Did they give you all the details? That must have been pretty jarring.
So I guess I'm going to let people read that in the book if you don't mind. But I myself was so in shock that I had an idea of what happened, but honestly, I hadn't really pieced together the details. And that's the reason why, after a period of time of really not even wanting to hear Botswana or elephants, etc., I made the decision that my last country that I would visit when I decided to travel to every country in the world would be Botswana, for closure, and also to really understand what happened and meet the people who were there with her on her last day and see the steps that she walked, etc.
And how many years later was that?
So that was only a year ago. Actually got to Botswana on her birthday, exactly 7 years after the last day I saw her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that you did that.
I think this is an important point here. We're in shock. And you know, particularly with COVID and people dying during COVID and that kind of thing, I like the idea that years later you can kind of circle back. I mean, because people sometimes hold things when they could circle back. It's not too late to circle back and find hope out of it.
Well, it's interesting the journey that whole process in itself took, because honestly, like right after the accident, I couldn't hear of Botswana. I didn't want to see an elephant. I had to take all the representations of elephants that my wife had all around the house down to then kind of, okay, at some point I do have to see an elephant. An elephant, you can't blame an elephant. They are wildlife. And so I didn't have really anybody to blame for my wife's death. And then to the idea of, you know what, I do have to go back there someday when I'm ready.
Right.
And I guess the story that I tell is when I landed in a helicopter in the camp itself, because it's in the Okavango Delta in the middle of nowhere. And I stepped out of the helicopter, the idea came to me, I'm on sacred ground. And that was a very like uplifting thing. Sure, it was like an emotional journey, but it was a journey of realizing that like I was a super lucky person to have been married to my wife. And I also felt like she had such an amazing time there before she was killed. I could see the people. I met the guy that she was with. He took me around, and I came away with a sense of like, gratitude in a way, a feeling that like Botswana is no longer like a bad name in my mind, but it's a place of loss, but also of like profound beauty, a sacred place, I guess.
Sounds like she was doing what she loved at the end. I Googled her just because I wanted to know as much as I could before this show, and there was a beautiful picture of her with an elephant necklace.
Talk a little bit about being dad and mom.
I told my son in Georgetown, and then the next day didn't really sleep that night in Dubai. I went to the airport very early in the morning, flight to Madrid, picked him up. The two of us flew to Georgetown to reunite with my older son, and then went home to California to Sausalito. We had 1 month later a significant, massive celebration of life for Jackie. There were about 700 people who attended. Her trademark was a sunflower. She had it tattooed on her arm. We probably had 500 sunflowers that we bought to put all over the room. And then what we decided was that Benjamin wanted to go back to school at Georgetown the next semester. And so I actually moved to DC for his next semester. He lived with me because he didn't want to live in the dorms, a place where he is informed that he lost his mom. And that's how we carried on. I guess what I'd say is like each of us grieves differently. And my boys grieved by just throwing themselves into their work. And my way was quite honestly just to be alone. I didn't know anybody in DC. I spent a lot of time meditation and reading books of profound wisdom. And I had launched my own personal study of Arabic, just stuff that, and I gave up pretty much everything I was doing. I gave up being on boards. I gave up looking at the stock market. I gave up watching sports. I gave up everything except for my foundation work, because I kind of had to like find my way and do it through meaning, as opposed to through like dopamine hits or things like that. And so that's what I did.
I like what you just said. You said you had to find meaning. I think meaning and purpose are, refining that or deciding what they're going to be is a pretty profound thing to be doing.
I agree with you, Mom. And I think that the thing that I was the most surprised about with my brother's death was that I lost my identity. I was like, who am I now? Like, who am I without Scott? And what does this mean? And how do I, like you said, put my life, how do I find meaning at this point?
There's no real like recipe for every single person on how to grieve and heal, but everyone needs to find their own way, and it really depends on them. And for me, I just need to be alone, and I need to be inside my head and figure things out, make sense of everything, make sense of who I am, who I want to be, what I can learn from this. Like what I say is, I felt like I really leaned into it. Like, I mean, I'm biased, but Jackie was a special person. She led with kindness, someone who had no agenda. Everyone who saw her and met her felt seen. And I'm not saying like I was the opposite. I'm not saying I was a bad person, hopefully not, but like there were ways that I wanted to live more like Jackie. I intended to figure out how to use this tragedy to kind of transform myself and make myself kind of more the person I always wanted to be in a way. And that's the path that I set myself on that eventually led to my travel journey in many other ways, I would say, changed me.
Your son was living with you, right?
Yeah, for his second semester at Georgetown, and that was just like a transition time. So after that second semester, we decided Benjamin would continue on his second year alone without dad and have a normal college experience, and that I would move back to Sausalito. And after taking Daniel to university, my younger son, coming home to an empty house in Sausalito with memories, it's everything. That's why I said I can't do this. I've been on this healing journey, and things have proceeded in a good, positive way. I could see myself on the doorstep of healing, and that sitting at home in Sausalito with all these memories would set me back. And that's when I sort of started my travel journey.
And how many years was that after Jackie died?
Well, that was just basically a year later. I found myself back in Sausalito. My boys both in college doing their thing, and I didn't have a gig because I gave up pretty much except for my foundation work. But that's not like 100% of my time. I'd given up pretty much everything I did, and along the way, I had taken a couple trips, changed the way I thought about things. I turned my head in a different direction. Less on grieving and more on there is stuff out there that I got to find. my first real trip was to Tajikistan to run a half marathon. That was in April of 2018, about 6 months after I lost Jackie. It was just a far out place, a place that I knew nothing about. And to top it off, there was a half marathon. And that got me into running, which also in itself like gave me like a sense of purpose, also made me tired enough to sleep through the night. I used to have this routine where I do some grief reading every night. Out of Martha Hickman has this book. There's 365 vignettes each day of the year, a different passage on grieving. And that was a religious Bible for me at night to get to sleep. And right after that, reading a passage, I would watch The Office, Steve Carell, something a little funny to make me laugh. And then I'd go to sleep. My first night in Tajikistan, I'd say I gave grief the night off. And I went right to The Office. And that itself for me was like an important moment to see that, okay, I actually am on a healing journey now. And my grieving period is sort of coming to an end. Now I'm starting to heal.
And how long was that after?
That was probably six months after. I felt like I'm on the doorstep of healing. My next big trip was with my boys. We walked part of the Camino in Spain. So my wife had walked that the year before with some of her girlfriends. And so for me, it was a way of following her path. As you know, when you walk the Camino, you have a passport. So you have stamps of all the places you've been. Well, we had Jackie's passport and we followed her steps along the way. We even found a dog that she wanted to bring home that she had sent me a photo of. So that was a really helpful thing to also be with my boys. As you know, with grief and stuff, sometimes it awkwardly changes the dynamics of a family relationship in a way. So we were like four of us, with Jackie being the bright light extrovert and the three of us more being a little bit on the introverted side. And then all of a sudden we had to find this new family dynamic of three men without like the center of our family there. And so that was a really helpful trip.
Wow, that's wonderful.
I love everything that Barry's talking about, Mom, because you almost created a treatment plan for yourself. You had exercise, you had the support of your kids, you had meditation, you had humor. It was an amazing plan that you put together for yourself.
I mean, I love you saying that, but like for me, it was unwittingly in a way. And I guess my biggest message is like, if you look truly inside after tragic loss, you will find a way there. You know, in other words, like, everyone's going to have advice for you, and it's okay to listen to the advice, but like if you look deep inside yourself, you know what you need. And I was benefited by basically being alone in DC and figuring it out, and that turned out to be the best medicine for me.
You know, I think that's really an important point, because we're like, oh, everybody's going to get out and talk to somebody, do a peer support group, blah, blah, blah. And you're saying that wasn't your way and that it wasn't what you needed. So I think that's really important. So tell us, you decided to write a book. Tell us about your book. Tell people where they can get it.
My journey to every country in the world has been amazing. And it started the way a lot of other things started, out of a bit of serendipity. As I mentioned, I met this young Spaniard who had been to every country in the world, which I didn't even know was possible. And that just got my mind going in a direction where talking about places like Iraq, where my mother was born, that was for me, like I talked to my cousin always, let's go to Baghdad someday. It was kind of like, let's go to the moon. It was like a dream that I thought we would never realize. So when I started on this journey, just after COVID, my boys were home during COVID, which was a blessing. The house was full with the kids needing, doing their work every day, and me being able to cook and clean and do all this stuff, be a dad. And then when they left, I realized I needed a gig. And so I found this idea of traveling to every country in the world. There are roughly only 400 people who have done that. For me, it's not the idea of just counting my countries, but it turned out to be like a view on the world that I hadn't really expected. People like to ask me, what's my favorite country? I like the question, what's my best experience? Turned out to be places where the perception you have of it is totally different from what you experience. And oftentimes it's countries that are mentioned very negatively in the news. So I like to say, like, my best experience was Syria, a country that had been destroyed, that had only been known for Assad, the war criminal, or the refugees going to Europe, but not for the people there who were incredibly hospitable, the amazing food, the beautiful sights, the history, etc. that when I now think of Syria, I don't think of what the media sort of, guides me to think about it. I think about my own impression of Syria. I have a Substack. If they go to my name, Barry Hoffner, and I have some articles that I've written about my travels and about the meaning and purpose behind them. And it also talks about my Substack about the cover of the book and what's the meaning behind the cover, because it's a very intentional cover. All proceeds from the book, 100%, will go to scholarships for young women in West Africa under my foundation in a program we call Bourse Jackie, the Jackie Scholarship. It's in her name. So far, we've scholarshiped 50 women from West Africa, either to university or for intensive English language studies.
Barry, thank you so much for being there and being a guiding light for so many who are looking for hope again after loss.
Thank you.
And we want to thank everybody for joining us on this show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.